Well, good evening, and welcome to the Oasis podcast. Hey, we're back, guys.
Yeah.
Last week we were here together. I'm John Yoder, and this is Steve Yoder and Burnell Beachy, and we serve as pastors together here at Oasis, along with our senior pastor, Wayne Weaver, and he isn't here tonight. I believe he's traveling, and so hopefully he will be back with us in a week. But last week we talked about the topic of career changes in midlife. How to make a career change without sinking my ship. And tonight, well, actually, after we finished that last week, it just didn't feel like we had finished, right? And so we talked about it. We said we need to come back and actually at least put a few more details in place and talk about this tonight. So tonight, this is How to Make a Career Change Without Sinking My Ship, Part 2. And so we're glad you're with us. I want to begin tonight, brothers, with just a verse, a couple of verses out of Proverbs. And they go like this. Proverbs 3, 5-7. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord, and depart from evil. Now, why would I read that when we're talking about making a job switch without sinking the ship? I think that these decisions in life are so tough. We can, there's any number of ways we make decisions. And I think really a good decision starts at the bedrock of trusting in the Lord with everything that is within us.
Yes.
All our being. And what does that mean? How does that look? And, we want to look at some of these questions of how does God really play into these life decisions that don't really seem like they impact anybody but ourselves and our family. We would maybe consider bigger things if we were looking at going into ministry, across the sea or doing this. We'd really want to make sure, but sometimes it feels like, well, there's an opportunity, let's take it. Is there a place for that? Are we free to make these decisions? So we want to talk about some of these things tonight, and it's kind of tough. One of the things we talked about after our last conversation was that we can give some tips here, but it's so hard because each job situation, each person, each life situation varies.
It does. Very different.
How do we then give? And I think we can't really speak to so much to the individual issues. Like we probably won't be talking to you tonight and saying, "Hey, thus saith the Lord for your job." There may be some of that, but I think what we're going to try to do is talk more about what are the principles. How do we process that decision? So last week I had mentioned a few problems. And I know this is a panel. I'm going to be asking you the questions, but I want to set the table here a little bit. Last time we talked about a few problems, and after our time together, I added 2 more. But I'm just going to run down those problems and things that may inspire us to want to change jobs. Number 1, this job's paying the bills, but it's no longer got any thrills for me. I mean, it's paying me okay, but I just don't have any passion for it anymore. Number 2, my body's telling me I can't do this forever. Number 3, it's just not going to reach. My job is fine, but I'm not going to reach my financial goals pursuing this line of work. Another one, I'd really like to change my job, but I've got no room. I'm strapped for cash. It's just not financially feasible for me to quit what I'm doing to start something else. I'm burned out. Why am I doing this after all? That's another reason a lot of people will look at other jobs. And then there's one that it just says, I don't fit here. I like the work, but I'm at odds with my corporate culture. What should I do? Ethically, I have a problem fitting in, or relationally, it just seems like I'm not working out with this culture. And then there was one that is incredibly obvious, but I forgot to put it on there, and that was help. I've been laid off. What do I do? Do I try to find something in my line of work, or do I take any job? Do I go back to school? How do I manage this? All right. So last week, you brothers gave us a really good rundown of some things we should look at. Some things like, what am I good at? What do I enjoy doing? What gets me up in the morning? Yeah. Is there a place to use those skills? Another one was, give thanks for the job that you have. It'll do good for your own personal benefit, but it will also open up possibly other opportunities. Give thanks for the job that you have. Thank God for giving you the work. We talked about, I think Pastor Steve, you talked about, can I leverage the skills that I have? Perhaps I can't work physically at this pace any longer, but can I leverage these skills if I were to have a position change within my company? Maybe I go from working actively on a construction site to being more of a managerial position or a foreman position, general manager, or something like that. Can I leverage my skills in a new position? And then we didn't speak a lot about this, but we talked about the seasons of life and where we are in life. And Pastor Steve, you mentioned that you're at a time where there's a season change that is upon you. Yeah. So having that as our foundation, kind of a long review from last time, we want to spend the rest of our time looking at several questions. How do we assess the need for change? And then we want to look at a series of questions that after the change is, and that need is assessed, how do we go about discerning a direction? So does that sound good to you? Are we ready to go with that? Yeah. All right. Yeah. So the first question is, how can a person process a job change with confidence? Where do you start?
I don't know that I think any change comes with certain amounts of apprehension. Even a season change, just a life change, anything like that comes with a certain amount of, you don't know what's on the other side. And sometimes there's even some sorrow involved in, you're leaving something, and even though it might be something better, at the time, I often kind of stood at the threshold, and I knew it was time to kind of move on, but I couldn't really for sure see what that looked like. And sometimes I even prayed for things. I said, Lord, I desire a change, but I don't even really know what it looks like. I just feel it's time to move on, but I'm not even quite sure what that looks like. And so it's kind of like you're closing the door to something familiar and to something you know, and now you're kind of stepping out into, I don't for sure know what this is going to look like. And so sometimes there's even just an element of sorrow there that I'm saying goodbye to something that served me well. Yeah. And even though I think this is going to be better, I don't for sure know. And so I know in the past, this is just my own experience, where I made a job change with so much confidence. I was so sure. And I blew past every warning sign, and especially my wife's intuition. She did not feel good about this. And I blew right past it, thinking this really is a great opportunity. And I had all the confidence in the world that this is going to work out, but it was probably one of the worst job decisions that I ever made. But part of it was I was in a place I didn't like, and so any opportunity looked like a much better one than where I was. And so sometimes when you're in that position and your emotions are charged up and it's you're reacting to something you don't like, I have made some of the worst moves just out of a reactionary sense, and I probably should have just stayed where I was at until my emotions weren't as involved. And so I made an emotional decision, rather impulsive. Turned out to be one of the worst ones I ever made.
Now that's interesting because you also brought in blowing past warning signs. One of those was your spouse. Which is, I think, is a key point in anything like this. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. Were there other warning signs that you would say you would have blown past? Because I think these are helpful. How can I process this? When those warning signs come up, they can look like hindrances. They can look like somebody's just trying to kill my
Zeal.
And my ambition. But what should we be looking for?
Well, there were some other. It was a newer company. Some people warned me it's probably not the best thing to be doing, but because I was in such a bad place, anything looked good. Anything looked better than where I was. And so I was kind of clouded. My perception was a bit clouded because I was in a place I didn't like. So even though people warned me, to me it was just, this is a no-brainer. This is going to be so much better. It's going to be back a little bit more in a field of what I understood, and that to me, to go back to something a little bit more familiar, I just thought was really the answer. And so yes, it was my spouse, and there were some other things that I certainly blew past, and they were right. They were very right. And but I learned some things, to be very careful when the emotions are charged up, that you don't make a move that is impulsive and it's not thought through. And so that's one thing I learned.
That's powerful. Wow. And so as you're looking at that, and we started with Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. There's that phrase, not on your own understanding, and don't be wise in your own eyes. Pastor Steve, how can we avoid leaning on our own understanding and being wise in our eyes?
Well, certainly, I think one of the first things is coming to the place to understand that our perspective is often flawed. Just acknowledging that and being aware of it is a big step. That there's more than one perspective, and my perspective may not always be in line. And as you read these verses in Proverbs, in the verse 7, be not wise in your own eyes, that speaks of humility. And, some of these are things, of course, are learned as we go through life and we experience bumps in the road. It teaches us that, you get to that age where you think you know a lot. Then life teaches you. You don't know all that much. And
some red-faced moments,
Red-faced moments, absolutely. Absolutely, those moments. Bumping your nose, falling down, and saying, that was a mistake. That was definitely a mistake. Those are teaching moments. Those are not moments, they want to discourage us, but they are teaching moments. And for a person whose heart is after the Lord, we can get up and, the righteous man falls down 7 times and gets back up and keeps on going. We will make mistakes. And to not allow those mistakes, I think, to want to freeze us from making decisions.
Right.
That, to me, is one of the bigger things. Not making a decision at times is making a decision. To not do anything, that can be a big mistake. And I know that because of mistakes in life, at times we're like, I don't want to make a mistake, and so we don't do anything. And that can keep us in a spot that is not good. Again, that comes from having gone down those roads also.
Yeah, you learn by those things.
You learn by those things.
Some mistakes are some of those things, pieces of knowledge and wisdom that carries us through later, comes by literally failing and or at least embarrassing ourselves royally. Well, as we look at processing this, then you talked about blowing by warning signs, and you talk about making these mistakes. When we look at what needs to change in a job, sometimes we just think, let me just change anything. But what needs to change? Is it me that needs to change? Do I need some character development? Is it my position in a company that needs to change, or is it my total job, or maybe even my location? How do we determine these things when we're feeling that restlessness?
That's a loaded question, John. I think it could be any one of those. Certainly one of the things that I've seen in my own life is that as I allow character development, which you mentioned, is a big key. Developing both our inner inner person, the inner strength of our life, character, and then our skills, even such things as people skills, realizing that being able to work on those things will open doors for us.
Right.
And looking back in my life, that's one of the things that I see that I would probably say concentrate on early on in life, learn what people skills are, learn how to associate and network with people, and that will open doors for you that some other things won't. That's a real thing to me. We want the leading of the Lord, but there are some practical things that we can do that will open doors for that will help open
people
doors
skills.
for us.
Tell me, Steve, you run a company, you employ people. What are some of the top skills that an employee should work on?
Learning to understand another person and where they're coming from, and learning to communicate well. If we can understand other people and empathize with them, and maybe at a point of conflict and understand, well, maybe they're coming from a perspective that I don't understand, and being open to that, and learning to have an open mind to those things, and to communicate well with another person that opens them up, that allows them to talk to you. That's a people skill that I think is extremely valuable. And developing those kinds of skills will open up doors for you in positions of management, and even it will just open up doors. When I look at the way my life has gone, I would concentrate I concentrate a lot on getting things done, physically getting things done. But when I look back, I could say networking with people and learning to know people is one of the biggest strengths that I would, going back, I would say I would concentrate on more.
Is that where we get that little phrase, it's not what you know, but who you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
Wow.
Work and jobs really is about people.
Yeah.
It's a relationship.
It's a relationship. And understanding that, I think, helps us to learning to relate to people, what makes other people tick, how to talk to them. Because I've really, in business, of course, but any job, you have to deal with people. And the more you do that, the more it will benefit your life and your job and your position. So working on yourself, allowing those things to work on you. Sometimes it's looking at a different position, but always allowing your own personal growth will always benefit you in some manner and in some way. And these are things that I think, if people can see and understand early on in life, will benefit them tremendously.
That's interesting, because I was speaking probably it's probably 15, 18 years ago to a good friend of mine, and he had just taken a job in HR with a company, and he was talking about all of the interviews he needed to do. And I said, so what do you look for in an interview? What is the solid, kind of the gold standard? He said, you know what? He said, everybody comes to me with a degree, with, a pedigree and everything else. But he said, what I actually am looking for is life skills. He says, we can teach them the work. He said, what I'm looking for is, how do they manage life in general? Are they able to keep their head above the water? Are they able to walk with their family? Do they, and so he asked a lot of questions pertaining to just those life skills of getting along with people and working through situations. And I thought, wow, that's very fascinating, because he said the job itself is rather, we can train them in the way we do things, but we can't build their character overnight. And so he was looking for what he called life skills. Yeah. Getting along with people, being responsible, doing those types of things.
Exactly.
So I guess if you're a person that has a hard time with that, maybe one of the things that needs to change first off is me, right? And then maybe if those things are in line, maybe looking at the job, maybe there's a different job within the company, but if there's not, maybe a change of companies would be the place to go. There's another question that plagues us, especially, and I say plagues, I believe it does. you know as well as I do that in church, when you have a young person coming up to you, one of the things they want to know is, what is God's will for my life? You know, if I could just skip all these other things and just get right to God's will, that would be wonderful. and then, you know, they get a job and they go on, and at some point a Christian will wonder, well, is my vocation, the job I'm working, is this an assignment from God, or is this just something I picked up? What part does our relationship with God and kingdom purposes come into the job that we choose? How would you say that? I mean, you blew by some warning signs. Was that a calling from God, or did you disregard that? If so, how do we get back to this? Is this even a valid question? Or is work, ministry, or is work ministry? Is it a calling and an assignment from God?
Yeah.
Burnell, do you have something you want to say?
Well, you know, I think it's also in Proverbs where it says that your gift will bring you before kings.
Right.
And, you know, when I started looking at my work, not necessarily as a job, we often refer to, well, I have a job. I was reading a book where the author was working in a firm, and one of the first months they celebrated a guy that was retiring. And he had spent 38 years at this company. And at his retirement party, he was celebrating, you know, 38 years, but he proceeded to say, I hated every day of the 38 years that I worked here.
Wow.
And so the man was like, well, why did you work here? Like, why did you do this? He said, well, son, it's just like this. There's bills to pay. It's called you need a job. And I thought, you know, so many people look at it simply in that way. It's just a method of producing revenue to pay bills. And so they spend a vast amount of their life in some place or a vocation that never really was perhaps their life work. So I always looked at it as, well, I want to find what is my work. They can, you know, anybody can be fired from their job, but they can never fire you from your gifting and your calling and your work. It may be at a different place. So I started to look and say, well, Lord, what is my work? What is my, I know we're pastors, and we could say, well, this is our, you know, this is ministry. But I began to see the amount of ministry that I can do right alongside of my day job, you know, if you want to call it that, is really also ministry. It's bringing value to someone else. And in everything we do, if you're not bringing value to a company, well, pretty soon you're of no value to the company. If you're not bringing value to your customer and you're fulfilling their needs, then you're not bringing any value. You're not adding anything. And so I think so much of the kingdom is, you know, when you look where Peter found his calling was at his work, his fishing job.
Right.
That's where the Lord found him. And each of them, they were mending their nets, and one was a tax collector. Where the Lord met them was on the job site.
That's right.
And made them fishers of men. And even when they didn't know what to do, they just went back fishing. And so I always think, you know, sometimes we separate ministry and we separate work. And no, I think it's in the midst of our work, and it's in the midst of what we do that the Lord meets us and finds us. And some of my greatest inspirations for messages came on a 5-gallon bucket on a job site somewhere. And so I think it's important to don't just look for a job, find out what is my work and what is my gift. What is it that no one can ever fire me from?
Absolutely. You know, that's good, because I've got a good friend that for years wanted or felt that he was called into ministry and was influenced to pursue some kind of full-time ministry, and it just seemed like it never really took off. I mean, he always had a passion for the Lord, but it just, none of these opportunities that he pursued really worked out. And then he got a job with a guy doing concrete. And about a year and a half into that, his boss said, well, I'm quitting. I'm not going to sell my business, but I will help any one of you who wants to get started in this if you want to do this. So he took the challenge. and really against all odds, started up just boom. I mean, not a ton of investment capital or anything, but just started going, and it was just sort of nip and tuck there for the first. But God blessed that, and within 2-3 years, he was doing incredible amount of work, and had just a tremendous witness as well with his crew and all of that. And we were talking about it one day, about this thing about ministry and working what God called him to do. And I said, brother, you're doing it. God has called you to this, and you have far more credibility on a construction site than I do as a pastor. You and your witness, you can speak to people on that site because you have credibility with them. I walk in there as a pastor, they're going to say, but what do you know about this? But you have this, and this is an open door of ministry. So I think, I really believe that there is a sense in which if we are in Christ and He is in us, He by His Spirit, we are walking in the Spirit. Our vocation definitely is a kingdom assignment.
Absolutely. I would see it that way. I definitely see it that way. And I think the idea that only pastors or ordained people are ministers is not the case. We are here to minister to the body of Christ, that they can minister also, or that they ought also be equipped to minister. But on the thing of the will of God, I look here again at Proverbs chapter 3, and the instruction there: trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not to your understanding, and then in all your ways acknowledge Him.
Yes.
To me, that is saying, in everything I do, it ties in with what Jesus said in Matthew: seek first the kingdom of God. Get your priorities right. In all your ways, and every way that you walk, that includes vocation, acknowledge God. Lord, lead me here. Ask Him to lead you. And the way I understand it, I look at it a little bit the way that I run business. I hire somebody. We first of all have a general will in business. We have principles that we operate by. We have things that we set forth that we stand for as a company. And so I will watch a new employee, and how do they honor those principles. And then I will have maybe a specific job assignment for them. How do they do in that? And then as they grow in that, I will speak to them some specific things that are my will. This is somewhat how I understand the will of God. He will reveal His will to us, but we need to be concerned about walking in the will that is revealed to us, and the principles that we are clear to us.
And so as you see that happening, you actually begin to, in a sense, unveil or reveal more.
That is exactly right. That is exactly. And this is the way I also understand the way that the Father deals with us. As I seek the kingdom and seek to acknowledge Him in everything that I do, He'll make His way clear to me. It's not always immediate, but He will. And He'll show me the way to walk as I walk in what I already know. This is how I found life to be, and this is also the principle that I operate and deal with my employees in.
So this is very good, talking about making this processing a job change with confidence. So one more question kind of in line with this is my vocation and assignment from God. If God has brought me here, can I leave at will? Or do I need to wait for a specific call from God to someplace else?
I think it can be a specific assignment. I do believe that it can be, definitely. And the individual themselves will have to answer that question in their own heart, and knowing what led them to that place and how they're operating in it, and what God is speaking to them.
Whether or not they blew past the warning signs. That's good. I appreciate you sharing that. So in making these changes then, how do we do this? I know that people will look at this and say, okay, well, what's the next thing? How do I make this decision? Do I make a list of pros and cons of the different options that are out here? Do I say, well, this job would have this, and this one, but it also has a few negatives, but this one has fewer positives and more negatives, so I'll take the one with the more positives. Do we do that? Sometimes we have people making decisions like that, and then you take a Christian that makes the list and then prays and then still looks at the list and goes for it. How do we walk in this in a way that is just like, you know what? Yeah, God is in this. I can do this with confidence.
Well, John, I think you could probably answer that question better than any of us. You have
I don't know about that.
You've made some incredible changes, location-wise.
That's right.
Even though you've spent most of your life in ministry, the way I understand, but you've made some changes as far as what you did in ministry. You've moved to locations that were outside of even the country. You've moved back, and we're really glad that you made a change to come here.
You know, I am
and
too,
I think you're done making changes now. I think the Lord will just have you here for a while now. But I've seen you make a lot of those changes, but I don't know a lot of those details. I mean, the way I understand, you grew up in Virginia, pastored a church in Indiana, and then spent about 10 years in Canada in prison ministry, and now you're here. And we're kind of talking more vocational kinds of things. You made some ministry types of changes. I'm just wondering how do you know when to change from one ministry to the next, or how did you navigate some of those things?
Well, that's a good question. I think I shared last week that one of the changes I made prompted a lot of disbelief and even the accusation that I was probably going through a midlife crisis, and maybe I should receive a little counsel on that. Those decisions did not come easy. A list of pros and cons for most of those decisions would not have taken me where I went. There were more cons, negative symptoms or signs that I could look at and say, you know what, that's just not going to be cool.
Now, coming here wasn't that way, was it?
No, that was but that's interesting leading up to it. I mean, these are some long stories, but the one to go from pastoring in Indiana to a ministry in prison in Saskatchewan was a 2-year process.
Wow.
A little over 2 years, about 2.5 years. And when I first made that, when I first thought of doing that switch, I had made myself accountable to a team of elders and my fellow pastors in the church. And when I first ran that idea by them, a couple of them were angry. Some just thought I was totally losing it. Some thought I was going through difficult times and was just trying to get away. And I really felt, well, my wife wasn't even sure maybe if I had lost it a little bit. But, through prayer and fasting together, my wife and I came to a real peace about the will of God for this, but I still was dealing with a team of elders that I had made myself accountable to that weren't there, and so I let the issue lie for over a year, and then I brought it up again, and I asked them if they would be willing to fast with me for 21 days, and just pray about God's will for this. And so at the end of those 21 days, they came back with a word of blessing. To proceed. And after that, it took about another year to actually process that whole change. So there was a real process that was involved in that. It was not a list of pros and cons. It really came down to a place where I felt in prayer to God, I felt that I needed to do this, but then I would feel anxiety, and I felt like the one time God just very clearly, and I know people have different ideas, does God speak to you? I'll say this, it was impressed heavily on my heart. John, where do you find peace? And when I thought of that question, I realized that when I was processing this change to go to Canada, I felt a complete peace before God. When I looked at trying to convince people, I developed anxiety, and I felt I needed to hedge that battle. And I felt like, again, that impression on my spirit was that you need to declare that you believe this is the will of God. And when I did that and I stepped out in faith, I no longer said, I may be wrong. You know, I could be seeing, I said, no, I really believe this is what God wants me to do. It changed. But again, there was a process involved in that, and I did not want to blow past the signs. I didn't want to blow past. So my wife, the elders, and then even working through the process with the church. So it depends where you are that the process can be longer. Not every job are you going to be able to say, I have 2.5 years to process this change. But I feel like for me in that case, it wasn't, the cons far outweighed the pros. Both reputation, comfort level, all of those things. But where ultimately it came down to was, where do I feel a peace? Do I feel a peace with God in this? I don't know. It's hard to describe that portion and to really quantify it. But I would say that was really where it came down to, and where I felt the peace was when the elders and my wife were in support of this. And my wife wasn't eager to go, but she felt a peace in going, knowing that God was calling us. So I think there was a real sense of accountability, and I think there are times when that helps us to not lean on our own understanding, but to engage others in the process of that decision.
That really is the walk of faith, isn't it? And some of these questions are very difficult from a worldly standpoint. You would say, well, pros and cons, take the best route. But that is not necessarily the will of God in these situations. But that really, it comes down to our own personal walk with the Lord in a lot of these things. And what is the Lord telling us on those, in that interior part of us where that peace rests? And that's what you went through.
Yes. Now, what about open doors and
Open
closed
doors.
I've heard people say, well, it's not that hard to make decisions. You just simply walk through the doors that are open and don't beat your head against doors that are closed. What do you say to that? Is that a good way to make decisions?
Well, Burnell, you had some open doors that you walked through, and yet there was warning signs, weren't there?
Right. I did, but if I look back now, I see, like I had mentioned before, I was reacting to a situation that I didn't like. And any opportunity looked better than where I was. And so it was maybe an opportunity. It was probably the best experience that I had was when I was in a position where, again, I didn't like, but I completely just surrendered myself to it. And I started to actually thank the Lord. Thank you for putting me here, because you're teaching me something that I need to know for the future. The minute I did that, in 2 weeks, I got a phone call. I didn't even have to go look for a job. I actually got an opportunity that came to me. And so I saw in that case, I wasn't trying to pry open a door. I wasn't trying to create some opportunity. The opportunity came and found me. And that's, in my opinion, is the best case scenario, if you can have an opportunity come to you and be in prayer and be fasting and be, I think it's one of the verses here in Proverbs says, if we acknowledge him in all of our ways, he will give us the desires of our heart. And God puts desires in us that are actually his. And he wants to fulfill those desires, but it's in his timing. I'm a rather impulsive, I can make decisions very quick, and I have run ahead of God's timing sometimes. Sometimes it was a desire and it was God's will, but my timing was just way off. And so I've learned to just understand that, you know what? The change and opportunity will come. I feel the desire, but I need to let it come to me instead of me trying to open and pry that door open. And too many times I've opened the door because we can really make things happen if we want to. But if it's not God's timing, then nothing really seems to flow out of it. It's just the sheer sweat and toil and just, grit that you put into it.
Yeah.
And the minute you quit, then you know what, you're just back to, it's just you. And I think in Proverbs it says, the blessings of the Lord makes one rich, and he adds no sorrow to it. The word sorrow means toil. The blessings of the Lord actually make us wealthy, but it's not with any added toiling on my part. And I've seen that aspect of it. When I wait on his timing, then things seem to flow versus me just making it happen.
So would you agree with somebody who tells you, and I've done that. I mean, I've heard that talking with people about their work. They'll say, well, we have we really don't have a problem. We just simply walk through the open doors. But I've found that sometimes doors that are open have a bucket of water sitting at the top. And just walking through is not always a pleasant experience. And I believe that if it was just about open and closed doors, for any of these decisions, we would probably lose our need for God in making that decision. We'd simply look for the door that was open and avoid the door that was closed. But Jesus made some interesting statements. He said, we're to ask, we're to seek, and we're to knock.
And to knock,
And I think that, and in fact, he says knock and the door will be opened. So if a door is closed, there may be some doors. I think whenever we're facing these, we need to ask, first of all. And even at the open doors, Lord, is this the one? And I think some doors that he may indicate that look closed, we need to knock.
That's good.
I think that there is something about that. So my thought is that in looking at these decisions, my feeling is, my experience has been, I really need the grace of God in these decisions. Because I can look at things that appear equal, and they're not equal at all in its results. And I know that God knows what's on the other side of these doors.
He does. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So it comes down again to walking with God in faith and making those decisions, hearing his voice, learning to know his voice, and walking with him.
Amen. Pastor Steve, you talked last week, and you brought up Proverbs 16, verse 9. Proverbs 16:3. Commit your works to the Lord, and your thoughts will be established. And there's another, just down a couple, 16 verse 9. A man's heart plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. How do those work out in job situations?
Well, I probably relate a little bit more to that because I haven't changed my career and occupation really more than about twice when I was young. But in situations that I've run into rather with difficulties with the occupation that I have, Burnell mentioned surrender. And I find that when I'm willing to lay it all out before the Lord, say, Lord, whatever result you want, and again, acknowledging him, Lord, that I'm here, not demanding my own way. There's times that this has cost me quite a bit of money because of wanting to do the right thing, again, walking in the principles that God has established, asking him to lead me, not being sure what step to take or how to respond to someone, but then walking by first of all, by his principles, and then by what in here I have peace with, and asking him to lead me and establish my thoughts. And often the way that it has worked for me is when I look back, is when I say, there the Lord led me. And at the moment, not always being quite sure, but asking him to guide my steps and acknowledging him in the decisions that I make, and having that surrendered heart of being willing to accept whatever the outcome is, but wanting to honor him in everything that I do, in the decisions that I make. That's the way I understand Proverbs chapter 3. Not my own understanding at times wanted to say this is not right, and yet taking something on myself that felt like I was being taken advantage of, and then later seeing the Lord honor that decision. This is the way that I understand these things.
So.
Our understanding says this is not fair, but yet honoring God in the decisions that were made. That's the way I understand it.
Well, this is good. Thank you so much, brothers. We're going to have to wrap it up again tonight, and I'm sure there's still lots left unsaid. We'd like to hear from you, and are there things that we missed and you said, boy, you guys really should have hit that one. You really needed to cover this. Send those comments to library@oasistabernacle.org. We'd love to hear from you. And I want to just finish with a verse that Burnell referenced, and that's Psalms 37, 4-5, and we'll end with this. And it just says this: delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. May God give comfort to your heart in this season of change and decision. And I pray that you find his will and his peace through this process. So God bless you. Have a good evening.
Yes.